Hey, what's up folks? How's it going? This is Waj. Hope you guys are all doing well. And this year has been really interesting when it comes to the whole smartwatch market. And here what we're going to do is I'm going to take 5 of my favorite smartwatches that came out this year in 2015 and put them head to head against each other. And we're going to basically do a shootout to determine which smartwatch reigns supreme. So specifically, we're going to be testing out the Apple Watch, the Moto 360 second generation, the Asus ZenWatch 2, the Pebble Time, and the Samsung Gear S2. So if you want to find out which smartwatch we liked the best this year, stay tuned and let's get right into it. Now, in order to determine which smartwatch reigns supreme, we're going to put all these watches through 5 different categories and give them each a score out of 10, and that way we can add up all the scores and see which one theoretically has the most to offer. Now, of course, it's important to keep in mind that this is based on my opinions and experience, and whichever smartwatch comes out on top in this shootout may not be the perfect watch for your personal needs and interests. Now, the first thing that we're going to take a look at is the build quality and design. Now, speaking of the build quality, pretty much all of these watches are very good. They're all to some extent dust and water resistant, so they're pretty durable in terms of most of the things you're going to do in every day-to-day life. But in terms of the design itself, now that is definitely more of a personal choice. For me personally, I think the Gear S2, Apple Watch, and Moto 360 have a fantastic design. There's no real complaints that I have with the design, and I think aesthetically they look really sleek and very modern. And in that regard, all 3 of these watches score a 10 out of 10 in terms of build quality and design. With regards to the Asus ZenWatch 2, the design is fairly good, but I think it's the largest overall footprint out of all the smartwatches, which can definitely be intruding for some people that have smaller hands and wrists, so that gets a 9 out of 10. And the Pebble Time is kind of controversial. It definitely has huge bezels around the screen, and the actual body itself is fairly large relative to the screen size, and it definitely has a more retro, geeky look, which may not be the taste for some people, so that gets a 7 out of 10 for me. Moving forward in terms of controls and user interface, the Gear S2 is probably one of my favorite smartwatches to use. The bezel itself is a large rotating dial, which is fantastic to navigate through the operating system, and you can even use it as an input device. Now, the Apple Watch has a plethora of different control options. It has a force capacitive touchscreen, a couple of physical buttons, and not to mention the digital crown interface on the side, which is excellent as a navigation tool and as an input device as well. Additionally, both the Gear S2 and the Apple Watch have a custom design operating system based on the hardware itself, which is definitely more optimized for a more cohesive user experience, and in that way they're a little bit easier to use and certainly more pleasurable to use as well. And through those means, both of those watches get a 10 out of 10 for me in this category. Now, both the Moto 360 2nd Gen and the ZenWatch 2 are using Google Android Wear, and it's a fantastic all-encompassing operating system that has OK Google Search integrated, as well as being pretty universally accepted with all sorts of different devices. And when it comes to physical controls, you control the watches through the capacitive touchscreen, which sometimes can be a little bit laggy and less responsive compared to the Gear S2 and indeed the Apple Watch. Now, probably one of the most unfortunate things about both of these two smartwatches is that there's really nothing new that they're bringing to the table compared to the previous generation models, and there's no real benefit compared to the other smartwatches you're seeing out there that have innovative user interfaces and innovative physical control methods that make the watch a little bit easier and fun to use. And then through that regard, I would give both of these watches a 7 out of 10 in this user experience and control category. Now, the Pebble Time, on the other hand, is pretty much novel in terms of its control interface. There is no capacitive touchscreen, and the way that you control the entire device is through way of physical buttons. You have 4 buttons on the watch itself, and after using the operating system, you really get accustomed to the functions of all 4 of these buttons, and eventually you can even get to the point where you can start executing simple commands on the watch without having to actually look at it, which is definitely a convenient option. Furthermore, more than any other operating system, I think the Pebble Time OS is really well thought out, and again, because it's a custom design for the hardware itself, it harmoniously blends everything together in a nice fashion, making it very pleasurable to use. So in that regard, I would give the Pebble Time a 9 out of 10 in terms of controls and user interface. interface. The reason why it doesn't get a perfect score is that I think it would still have some sort of benefit of having a larger overall screen with capacitive capabilities, since that's the norm these days. Now next we're going to take a look at compatibility. Now both the Apple Watch and the Gear S2 are kind of limited in terms of the devices that they're optimized for. Sure, there is a possibility of using the Gear S2 on a traditional Android smartphone, but it's really optimized and specifically designed around the Samsung ecosystem, much in the same vein as the Apple Watch is designed around the iOS platform. So in both those regards, they get a 5 out of 10 because they're not the most widely compatible devices. But with respect to the ZenWatch 2, Moto 360 2nd Gen, and Pebble Time, all three of these smartwatches are cross-compatible with both Android and iOS platforms. So in that vein, they get a 10 out of 10. Now for those people using Windows devices or perhaps another operating system besides iOS or Android, they're kind of out of luck. But again, most people are using iOS or Android, so in that regard, any of these three watches will be a perfect addition for them. Now moving on, let's talk about battery life. I've actually spent a decent amount of time testing out the battery performance of all 5 of these smartwatches for the past couple of months, and the way that we're going to evaluate this is we're going to take a look at the amount of hours that each battery lasts, and we're going to take a look at the overall user experience and hardware in order to justify a quantitative measure. So basically here you're looking at a chart of the average battery life of all 5 of these smartwatches, and as you can see, there's an overwhelming winner over here, and that's obviously the Pebble Time. Now the Pebble Time has a very efficient operating system, a very low powered CPU, and the whole architecture is based around maximizing the battery life as much as possible. It's using an e-paper display which is on all the time but doesn't need to be physically backlit all the time, and it only takes power when it needs to refresh the actual display. So it's an absolute beast when it comes to battery efficiency. That's why it gets an average battery life of over 90 hours based on my experience, and compared to the Gear S2, which comes in second place, of 24 hours. The Moto 360 2nd generation comes at 19.2 hours. The Apple Watch lasts around 18 hours. And lastly, we have the ZenWatch 2, which lasted around 16.8 hours based on my battery test. Now, the last thing that we're going to talk about is the overall value of each of these smartwatches. And the way we're going to justify everything is we're going to talk about all the different parameters we discussed throughout this video, and then we're going to factor in the actual asking price of each of these products. And obviously, there's going to be a range of different pricing because a lot of these smartwatches comes in different models and different sizes. But of course, we're going to focus on the watches that we're specifically using in this shootout. And now, starting with the Gear S2, it starts at $249 and goes to about $300 for the classic version. Now, we actually have the Gear S2 Classic, but if you get the standard kind of sports version, it's pretty much identical in terms of functionality and specifications, but there is obviously a little bit of aesthetical difference, which may be a preference for some people. But based around the $249 price tag, there's definitely a lot of value here, and I would give it a solid 9 out of 10. And regarding the Asus ZenWatch 2, this is one of the cheaper Google Android Wear devices, and it's definitely good value for the money. 8 out of 10 there. The Moto 360 2nd generation is definitely a little bit more expensive. There's obviously a 42mm version and a 46mm version, priced at $299 and $349 respectively. And besides having the heart rate monitor at the back of the watch, there's really no big difference between this and the ZenWatch 2 from a specification and functionality standpoint. So there's definitely less value over here, and that's why I would give it a 7 out of 10. The Apple Watch is starts around $349 and goes all the way up to a crazy $20,000 if you get the 18 karat gold version with the fancy straps. But if you get the standard sports version over here, which retails for about $350, which is still pretty expensive compared to the other smartwatches such as the Gear S2 and ZenWatch 2. And even though from a functional and design perspective, it definitely has a lot of thought and money put into it, but I still think it's overpriced compared to the market of smartwatches that we have right now. And lastly, regarding the Pebble Time, it's one of the most aggressively priced smartwatches on the market, and with that price tag, it's definitely worth a solid 10 out of 10, especially when you start thinking about the feature sets and the different benefits we talked about in this video at this specific price tag. Now, with all that done, let's finally add up all the scores with all the different categories. And as you can see over here, with a total score of 46 points out of 50, we have the Pebble Time as the clear winner of this shootout. In second place, we have the Gear S2 at 41 points. At third place, we have the Moto 360 2nd generation. At fourth place, we have the Asus ZenWatch 2. And in last place, we have, sadly, the Apple Watch. But really on that, guys, that's really it. Definitely make sure that you understand that this comparison and shootout was based on my specific experiences and needs. Again, you might have unique needs that might make another smartwatch a more reputable and more appropriate to whatever you specifically want to do with a smartwatch. But in general, I think a smartwatch should be a fairly simple device. It should last a long time. It should be cross-compatible with a whole bunch of different devices that most people are using. And I think the Pebble Time certainly encompasses most of those features. Plus, it's not too expensive where it's going to burden you with a large price tag. So in terms of value, it's definitely the best at this point. At second pick, I would definitely say my favorite kind of premium smartwatch is the Samsung Gear S2. It's a fantastic design, great interface, really nice to use. Obviously, there's some caveats, a little bit more expensive than the Pebble Time, but it's definitely representative compared to most of the other smartwatches that you can get out there. But if you like this video, helped you out in some way, definitely give us a thumbs up. That really helps us out tremendously. Check out the description down below. You'll find the links to all of the smartwatches we tested out. And thank you again for watching. We'll see you later. Take care.